The Crawford mansion stood at the very end of Pine Hill Avenue, a towering estate of stone and glass that seemed almost too grand for the quiet Chicago suburb it overlooked. Its tall, arched windows reflected the pale gold light of early autumn, while ivy curled along the edges of the walls, as if trying to soften the building's intimidating elegance. The neighbors often spoke of it in hushed tones, not because of any scandal, but because it belonged to Ethan Crawford, a man whose story was the kind that sounded like an urban legend. Ethan had built his fortune from the ground up, starting in his 20s with a struggling logistics company that he transformed into a national powerhouse. Success had come quickly, and with it, the kind of lifestyle people only saw in glossy magazines. Foreign vacations, high-profile galas, and the kind of house that came with a private chef, a gardener, and a full-time staff. But if you stepped inside those stone walls today, you wouldn't find the warmth of a bustling home. You would find a hush that clung to the air, heavy and unmoving, like a museum where no one dared to touch anything. At the center of this quiet world was Lily Crawford, Ethan's 8-year-old daughter. Lily had been born with a rare muscular condition that left her unable to walk. From her first months, doctors had explained that her muscles lacked the necessary strength to hold her weight, and every attempt at therapy had led to the same frustrating conclusion. Her condition was permanent. For Lily, the wheelchair had never been temporary. It was the only way she had ever known to move through the world. 3 years earlier, tragedy had cut deeper into the family. Ethan's wife, Rebecca, had died suddenly from a ruptured aneurysm. Her absence had left a wound Ethan didn't quite know how to tend. He had thrown himself into his work, telling himself that he was securing Lily's future, when in truth, he was hiding from the reality of his grief. In the day-to-day, Lily's care had fallen largely to Claire, the full-time nanny Rebecca had hired before she passed. Claire was in her mid-30s, with calm brown eyes and a manner that could soothe Lily's worst tantrums. She was efficient without being cold, patient without being patronizing. To Ethan, she had always seemed competent, a steady presence in a life that had too many moving parts. He paid her well, trusted her schedule, and rarely questioned her methods. Yet, for all the comfort and safety the house provided, it remained a strangely lonely place. Ethan knew it, even if he didn't say it aloud. The rooms were always immaculate but felt underused, as though no one truly lived there. Conversations between father and daughter were often short, bridged by small talk and bedtime kisses that felt too brief. On that crisp autumn morning, Ethan had been halfway through his second cup of coffee when he noticed something unusual. Through the kitchen window, he could see Claire crossing the back garden, her steps brisk, a blanket draped over one arm. In her other hand, she carried a small basket, the kind Lily used to hold her crayons. Ethan didn't think much of it at first, but a few minutes later, when he went to check on his daughter before heading to the office, he found her wheelchair empty. The sound of muffled voices drew him toward the sunroom, a bright, glass-walled space at the far end of the house that overlooked the garden. He stopped just short of the doorway, curiosity pricking at him. Inside, Claire was kneeling beside Lily, who sat on a low padded bench instead of her chair. Claire's hand rested lightly on Lily's back, and she was speaking in a tone that was both urgent and encouraging. Ethan couldn't make out every word, but he heard phrases like, "Just try one more time," and "I know you can do this." He saw Lily's small hands grip the edge of the bench, her brow furrowed in concentration. Slowly, painfully, she shifted her weight forward, her feet brushing the floor. The sight jolted Ethan. The doctors had always warned against attempts like this, said it was a waste of effort and risked injury. His first instinct was to step into the room, to put a stop to whatever Claire thought she was doing. But something in Lily's expression stopped him cold. Her lips were pressed tight, her face flushed with determination. She was trying in a way he had never seen before, as if some hidden reserve of willpower had been tapped. Ethan stayed in the doorway, unseen, his pulse quickening. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to think, or which part of him would speak louder. The father who wanted to protect his daughter from harm, or the man who couldn't ignore the spark of something he had almost given up on entirely. And then Claire's voice cut through the silence. "One day soon, you won't need that chair at all." Ethan's breath caught. Something told him this was only the beginning of a truth he hadn't been prepared to face. The sound of rain had begun to patter softly against the airport's glass facade as Ethan stepped out of the terminal, his leather briefcase swinging lightly at his side. The October sky hung low and gray, threatening heavier showers. But for once he didn't care about the weather. His flight had landed almost an hour earlier than expected, the rare gift of an early return from a week of back-to-back meetings in Dallas. The driver was already waiting with the black town car idling at the curb. As Ethan slid into the back seat, he felt an odd anticipation, an itch to see Lily, to hear her voice. He told himself it was because it had been a long trip, but somewhere deeper he knew the truth. His mind kept circling back to that morning in the sunroom, the strange mix of shock and curiosity he had felt watching Claire encourage Lily. The drive home was quiet. The city streets gave way to tree-lined avenues, each branch tipped with leaves the color of burnished copper. The car pulled through the wrought iron gates of Pine Hill Avenue, and soon a mansion rose into view, regal yet unmoving, like a painting against the damp air. Ethan didn't call out when he stepped inside. He loosened his tie, shrugged off his coat, and let the faint scent of cinnamon drift from the kitchen. Probably something Claire had baked for Lily. The house was peaceful, no footsteps or voices, only the distant hum of the refrigerator. It was then that he noticed a glimmer of movement through the glass corridor that led to the back of the house. He walked toward it, his shoes silent on the polished floor. The sunroom's wide panes of glass blurred with mist from rain, but through them he caught sight of Claire. She was kneeling again, her head bent close to Lily's. This time they were in the middle of the room, the wheelchair pushed far back against the wall. Something about Claire's posture was different. Her hands hovered near Lily's arms, not supporting her directly, but ready to catch her if needed. Lily's feet were planted on the floor, her knees trembling slightly as she leaned forward. Ethan could see her breathing deeply, bracing herself. Just one more, sweetheart. Claire's voice was faint through the glass, but carried the same quiet urgency as before. Focus on your toes. Imagine they're reaching for the rug. Ethan stood frozen. Every instinct told him to interrupt, to stop this unapproved, risky exercise. But his feet remained planted. There was a pull in the scene, not just the action, but the way Lily's eyes locked on Claire's. Her expression, a mixture of strain and hope. And then it happened. Lily's body rocked forward, her legs quivering as she shifted her weight. She didn't rise all the way, but she pushed herself higher than he had ever seen. Claire's hand twitched toward her, then steadied at her side. There, Claire said softly. Do you feel that? That's strength, Lily. That's you. Lily let out a breath that was almost a laugh before collapsing gently back onto the bench. Claire crouched to her level, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Tomorrow we'll try again. But for now, you did more than enough. Ethan's chest tightened. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the way Lily's face lit up, a shy, surprised pride flickering there. For years, he had watched her accept limitations without complaint, almost as if she had been born resigned to them. Now, for the first time, she looked different. He turned away before either of them saw him. His hand lingered on the doorframe as he tried to process what he'd just witnessed. Was this progress or dangerous defiance? He had trusted Claire implicitly for years, but this was something else. Later that evening, the house took on its usual quiet rhythm. Lily was in her room reading aloud to her stuffed rabbit, a bedtime ritual she insisted upon. Ethan lingered at the doorway, listening for a few moments before stepping inside. She looked up and smiled, that effortless warmth that could undo him completely. You're home early, she said. Couldn't stay away, he replied, sitting on the edge of her bed. How was your day? She shrugged, glancing down at her book. Good. We did stuff. Stuff. He smiled, but the word lodged in his mind. Anything special? Her lips curved into a faint grin, but she didn't elaborate. Just regular things. After tucking her in, Ethan headed downstairs, finding Claire in the kitchen rinsing a mixing bowl. She turned as he entered, her face unreadable. You didn't mention you'd be home early, she said casually. Didn't know until I was already boarding. He leaned against the counter, studying her. How was Lily's day? She did well. Ate all her lunch, finished her reading assignment. Claire's tone was even, almost rehearsed. That's it? He asked. She hesitated just a fraction too long. That's it. Ethan nodded slowly, masking his thoughts. But as he walked away, that hesitation echoed in his mind. Claire had left something out. He was certain of it. And whatever it was, Lily was in on it too. In his study later, the rain had stopped, leaving the windows streaked with silver. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the unopened folder of financial reports in front of him. His mind wasn't on quarterly projections or shareholder expectations. It was on the image of Lily's trembling knees, her tiny hands gripping the bench. Somewhere deep inside, suspicion began to take root. Not the kind that made him think Claire was malicious, but the kind that whispered she was playing a different game than the one he thought they were in. A game he wasn't sure he understood yet. And for a man like Ethan Crawford, not understanding was the most unsettling thing of all. The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn. Sleep had been shallow, tangled with half-formed thoughts about Claire and Lily. He dressed in silence, bypassing the gym and coffee maker, and found himself wandering toward the dining room. The long table was set neatly for breakfast, sunlight just beginning to seep through the tall windows. Claire was already there, pouring a glass of orange juice for Lily, who was still in her pajamas. "Morning," Claire said, offering a polite smile. "Morning," he replied, taking a seat across from Lily. The usual chatter was absent. Lily focused on buttering her toast with exaggerated care, avoiding her father's eyes. Ethan studied the scene, waiting for an opening. When Lily finished her bite, he leaned forward slightly. "So what's on the schedule today?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. Claire listed the day's plan: a reading lesson, some drawing time, and a visit to the park if the weather held. It was an ordinary agenda, but it didn't align with the sense of secrecy Ethan had felt the night before. "And her therapy?" Ethan asked, watching Claire closely. "We'll do the stretches after breakfast," she said quickly. He nodded, letting it drop for now, but the question kept looping in his head. Something was off, not just in her tone, but in the way Lily kept glancing at Claire, almost as if for permission. After breakfast, Ethan drove to his downtown office, but work refused to hold his attention. By mid-morning, he had made up his mind. He picked up the phone and called Dr. Phillips, Lily's longtime pediatric specialist. "Ethan," the doctor greeted warmly. "Everything all right?" "I'm not sure," Ethan admitted. "I wanted to ask about Lily's therapy plan. Specifically, if there have been any recent changes." "Not that I'm aware of," Dr. Phillips said. "The regimen I sent over last month should still be the one Claire's following. 3 sessions a day, light resistance work, nothing that strains her lower limbs." Ethan hesitated. "And if that plan isn't being followed?" The doctor's voice sharpened. "Why do you ask?" Ethan considered how much to reveal. "Let's just say I've noticed some differences in the way Claire works with her. Things I don't remember approving." There was a pause. "If she's improvising outside of what we've discussed, I'd like to know immediately. Lily's condition is delicate. Any unsupervised changes could do harm." They agreed to meet in person the next afternoon. Ethan ended the call, but instead of relief, he felt a deeper unease. The fact was, he had no idea what Claire had been doing with Lily behind closed doors, or why she would hide it. That evening, he decided to address it head-on. He waited until Lily was in the den working on an art project, then found Claire in the pantry restocking supplies. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. She looked up, startled by his tone. "About what?" "About what's been going on during Lily's therapy. I called Dr. Phillips today." Claire set the box of cereal she was holding onto the shelf with deliberate care. "And he says you haven't been following the prescribed plan. Not for weeks." Her eyes didn't waver, but something tightened in her jaw. "I told you before, Ethan, I'm trying a different approach." "You told me nothing," he countered. "You've been evasive. You've left things out. And now I find out you've been ignoring medical advice entirely." Claire stepped closer, lowering her voice. The standard plan wasn't helping her. She was stagnating. "I've seen that happen before, with my brother. If I'd waited for the doctors to adjust his treatment, he'd still be stuck in that chair." "This isn't your brother," Ethan said sharply. "This is my daughter." They stood in tense silence, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the space between them. Finally, Claire spoke, her tone softer. I'm not trying to undermine you, but sometimes what's written on paper doesn't match the reality in front of you. Lily can do more than they think. I've seen it, and if you let yourself see it too, you'd believe me. Her words landed harder than he expected. He wanted to dismiss them, but the image of Lily's determined face in the sunroom flickered in his mind. Still, he wasn't ready to admit that to Claire. We'll discuss this after I speak to Dr. Phillips in person, he said finally. Until then, you follow a prescribed plan. Exactly. Claire's eyes darkened, but she nodded once and stepped aside. Ethan walked out, his pulse still pounding. That night, as he lay in bed, the house quiet around him, a thought kept intruding. What if Claire was right? What if the limits they had accepted for so long weren't truly there at all? The possibility was as frightening as it was intoxicating. The following afternoon, Ethan left the office early, determined to speak with Dr. Phillips in person before returning home. The doctor's office occupied a quiet corner of the medical complex near the river, far from the bustling downtown traffic. When Ethan entered, the waiting room was nearly empty, just the soft rustle of magazines and the low hum of the air conditioning. Dr. Phillips emerged from a side door, a lean man in his early 60s with silver hair and a calm, deliberate manner. He shook Ethan's hand firmly. "Let's go to my office," the doctor said. Inside, the blinds were half drawn, letting in slices of muted sunlight. Ethan didn't waste time. "I need clarity about what's best for Lily. I know Claire has been improvising with her therapy, and I want your professional opinion. No hedging." Dr. Phillips steepled his fingers. "Ethan, I've worked with Lily since she was an infant. Her condition has limits. Those limits aren't imaginary. The regimen I created is meant to maintain her muscle tone without overtaxing her system. But if there's any chance she could improve, improvement beyond a certain point isn't likely," the doctor interrupted, though his tone remained gentle. "That's not pessimism, it's reality. Pushing her too far could cause injury or setbacks that erase the progress we've made." Ethan left the meeting with no new answers, only more uncertainty. The medical perspective was firm, but so was Claire's conviction. On the drive home, his thoughts shifted between caution and the memory of Lily's spark of determination. When he arrived at the mansion, the late afternoon light was spilling across the marble floors. He found Claire and Lily in the library, Lily seated at a low table covered in paper and colored pencils. Claire was beside her, guiding her through a drawing of a carousel. "Lily," Ethan greeted warmly, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. "That's beautiful." She beamed. "It's for you. I'm going to finish the horses next." Ethan smiled but turned to Claire with a more serious expression. "We need to talk. Now." They stepped into the hallway, out of Lily's earshot. Ethan kept his voice low. "I spoke with Dr. Phillips. He believes the standard plan is the safest route. He's concerned about what you've been doing." Claire crossed her arms. "I'm not surprised. Most doctors think that way. It's easier to tell someone their limits than to help them push past them." "This isn't a debate," Ethan said. "I'm telling you to stop the alternative methods until I can decide how to proceed." Her gaze was steady, but there was a flicker of defiance there. "And if stopping means she loses the progress she's made, will you take responsibility for that?" The question hit harder than he wanted to admit. Ethan held her stare, but didn't answer immediately. He hated the position he was in, choosing between medical caution and the possibility of something more. That evening, while Lily was upstairs getting ready for bed, Ethan returned to the library. The scattered drawings were still on the table. As he gathered them, he noticed a folded sheet tucked beneath the pile. When he opened it, he found what looked like a chart, rows of dates, small notes in Claire's handwriting, and simple diagrams of exercises. The most recent entry read, "Held standing position for 8 seconds. More stability in knees." Smiled after. It wasn't a medical log. It was personal. Claire had been documenting progress quietly, almost like a secret journal. The next morning, he decided to confront her once more, but this time without the heat of accusation. He found her in the kitchen preparing breakfast. "I saw your notes," he said simply. She looked up from slicing strawberries, her expression unreadable. And they're detailed, thoughtful, not reckless like I imagined. Why didn't you show me this before? Claire set the knife down. Because I knew you'd run straight to the doctor, and he'd tell you to stop. I wanted you to see results before you heard the warnings. Sometimes, the only way to believe something is possible is to watch it happen with your own eyes. Ethan leaned against the counter, torn. If I let you continue, we do this my way. More oversight, more communication. No surprises. A small smile curved her lips. Deal, but you'll need to be prepared for what you might see. He didn't ask what she meant. Deep down, he already knew. She believed Lily could do the impossible. And if she was wrong, they'd both have to live with the consequences. That night, as the city lights shimmered beyond the tall windows, Ethan stood in the quiet of his study, feeling the first tremors of something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. Fragile, dangerous, but alive. The next Saturday morning carried a strange kind of stillness. The air outside was sharp with the bite of early November, and the mansion's windows fogged slightly at the corners from the warmth inside. Ethan had decided to forego his usual weekend calls and meetings, determined to be more present, though he wasn't entirely sure what that meant yet. He found Claire and Lily in the conservatory, the glass ceiling revealing a pale sky streaked with silver clouds. Lily was perched on the edge of a cushioned bench, crayons scattered beside her, while Claire sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a small, weathered notebook. When Claire noticed Ethan in the doorway, she closed the notebook and set aside. "You're up early," she remarked. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. "And I think it's time you tell me everything. No half-truths, no omissions. Whatever you've been keeping from me about Lily's condition, I want to hear it now." Claire hesitated, her gaze drifting briefly toward Lily, who was absorbed in her drawing. "Not here," she said quietly. "She doesn't need to hear this yet." They moved to the study, closing the door behind them. The morning light slanted across the room, dust motes drifting in the beams. Claire didn't sit right away. She remained standing, as if bracing herself. "I've been working with Lily for almost 3 years now," she began. "And from the start, I followed the therapy plan, at least at first, but I started noticing things. Tiny things, like how she could lift her legs slightly higher on some days, or how her balance seemed better when she was focused on something she enjoyed. The changes were subtle, but they were there." Ethan folded his arms. "That still doesn't explain why you went behind my back." "Because when I mentioned these observations to Dr. Phillips, he dismissed them," she said, her voice tightening. "He told me it was normal fluctuation, nothing worth changing the approach for. But I've seen this before, Ethan. My younger brother, Daniel, was diagnosed with a similar condition when we were kids. The doctors told us the same things, that it was permanent, that progress wasn't possible. But my mother refused to believe that. She tried different techniques, things no one had recommended. And Daniel, he walks now. Not perfectly, but he walks." Ethan's skepticism wavered. "You're saying Lily's situation might be the same?" "I'm saying it's possible," Claire replied firmly. "About 6 months ago, I decided to quietly incorporate what I'd learned with Daniel into Lily's sessions. It's been slow, and I didn't want to give you false hope. But then something happened 2 weeks ago." She crossed the room, retrieved a notebook from her bag, and handed it to him. Inside were meticulous daily entries, descriptions of exercises, Lily's responses, small but measurable improvements. Midway through the notebook, one page was marked with a ribbon. Ethan opened it and read, "October 21st. Lily stood unassisted for almost 3 seconds. No support, just me nearby. She laughed afterward, said it felt like flying." He read the sentence twice. 3 seconds, he murmured, almost to himself. Claire nodded. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd want confirmation from a doctor first, and I wasn't ready for this to be shut down. I wanted to see if it could happen again. It has. Twice since then. And yesterday," she hesitated. "Yesterday she stood for nearly 5 seconds." Ethan closed the notebook slowly. That shouldn't be possible. Not with what she was diagnosed with. "I know," Claire said. "That's why I think the diagnosis might be wrong, or at least incomplete. I've been reading everything I can, and I found case studies that sound eerily similar to hers. Kids misdiagnosed with irreversible muscle disorders when a real issue was something treatable, like a nerve misfiring or a spinal signal issue. The idea sent a tremor through Ethan's chest. Hope was dangerous. It could make you see things that weren't there. But he couldn't deny the weight of the evidence in her notes. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the study door. Lily peeked in, her hair slightly mussed from leaning over her artwork. "Dad, can we go outside after lunch? It's not raining today." Ethan smiled faintly. "Sure, kiddo. We'll bundle up." After she left, he looked back at Claire. "If what you're saying is true, we can't just keep this between us. She needs a new evaluation, a fresh set of eyes on her case." Claire's expression softened with relief. "That's all I wanted. Someone willing to look at her without the old assumptions." Ethan set the notebook on his desk. "I'll find the best specialist in the city. Someone who isn't afraid to challenge the original diagnosis." Claire let out a breath, almost a quiet laugh. "Then we're on the same side after all." Ethan didn't say it aloud, but in that moment, something shifted between them. The arguments, the mistrust, they were still there, but now they shared something else. A fragile alliance, built on the smallest, most dangerous thing in the world. The belief that maybe, just maybe, Lily's future wasn't as fixed as they had thought. By Monday morning, Ethan had already set the wheels in motion. His assistant, Patricia, had compiled a list of top pediatric neurologists and rehabilitation specialists within driving distance of Chicago. Names and credentials scrolled across his laptop screen, but he kept returning to one in particular, Dr. Marlene Sutter, a well-regarded neurologist known for challenging conventional diagnoses. He called her office, expecting to be told there was a months-long wait. Instead, the receptionist offered a cancellation slot for Thursday afternoon. Ethan accepted without hesitation. The moment he hung up, he felt a flicker of something rare, anticipation, mixed with a cautious kind of hope. But the optimism didn't last. Before he could even share the news with Claire, his phone rang again. It was Mark Dalton, his chief financial officer. "Ethan, we have a serious issue," Mark said without preamble. "There's been a breach in one of our supply chain contracts. The numbers aren't adding up, and it looks like we're on the hook for penalties if we don't resolve it immediately." Ethan's mind shifted gears, the weight of his company's responsibilities pressing in. How bad? Bad enough that if this isn't fixed within the week, we're talking 7 figures in losses and potential lawsuits. "I need you here in person." The rest of the day dissolved into tense phone calls and strategy sessions. By late evening, he was in his study, staring at 2 open calendars on his desk. One for the urgent business meetings in New York that Mark insisted required his presence, and one marking Lily's appointment with Dr. Sutter. They overlapped perfectly, each demanding his full attention. Claire knocked lightly before stepping inside. "I made some tea," she said, setting the cup on his desk. "You look like you're solving the world's problems." "Just my own," he said, rubbing his temples. "The appointment for Lily is Thursday, but I might have to be in New York the same day." Her expression tightened. "This isn't something you can reschedule, Ethan. Specialists like Dr. Sutter don't just appear on your calendar twice." "I know," he said quietly. "But if I don't go to New York, the fallout could threaten the company. And if the company falls apart, she loses more than just a chance at walking." Claire finished. "She loses the security you've built for her." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft tick of the mantel clock. Then Claire spoke again. "You can't split yourself in 2, but maybe you don't have to. Let me take her to the appointment." The suggestion caught him off guard. "You'd handle it without me there?" "She trusts me, and I'll document everything, record the whole session if they allow it. You'll get every detail." He hesitated, torn between control and practicality. "I'll think about it." The next 2 days were a blur of crisis management. Ethan was up before dawn, pacing the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear, negotiating with suppliers and lawyers. He barely saw Lily except in passing, her small voice calling good night from a hallway as Claire shepherded her to bed. By Wednesday evening, the decision was made for him. A key meeting in New York was locked in for Thursday morning, and if he didn't attend, the potential damage could ripple through every branch of his company. That night, he sat on the edge of Lily's bed, watching her sleep. Her hand rested on her stuffed rabbit, her breathing steady and soft. He thought about the possibility that Thursday could be the day they heard something life-changing, and that he wouldn't be there to witness it. In the early hours of Thursday, Ethan left for the airport, the city still cloaked in darkness. Claire arrived at Dr. Sutter's office that afternoon with Lily, bundled in her favorite blue coat. The waiting room was warm, lined with shelves of children's books and bright murals of forests and animals. Dr. Sutter greeted them personally, her manner brisk but kind. She examined Lily's previous medical records, her brow furrowing slightly at certain notes. The evaluation was thorough: reflex tests, coordination assessments, muscle strength measurements. Claire stayed close, offering quiet encouragement. After nearly an hour, Dr. Sutter sat down with Claire, her expression thoughtful. Some of what I'm seeing doesn't match the original diagnosis. There are inconsistencies in muscle fatigue patterns and nerve responses. It's too early to make promises, but I'd like to run a series of more advanced tests. Claire recorded every word. And if the tests confirm your suspicions, then we may be looking at a condition that's not only treatable, but significantly more optimistic in prognosis, Dr. Sutter replied. However, I must caution, even with a better diagnosis, progress will take patience, and there will be setbacks. Back in New York, Ethan was sitting in a quiet corner of the hotel lobby between meetings when his phone buzzed. Claire's message came through. Appointment went well. Possible misdiagnosis. We'll explain in detail when you're back. For a moment, the tension of the week eased. He leaned back, letting the words settle in. Possible misdiagnosis. 2 words that could rewrite everything. But before he could dwell on it, Mark appeared, waving him toward the next meeting. Business, as always, demanded its pound of flesh. The flight back from New York landed just after midnight. The cabin lights had been dim for most of the trip, but Ethan hadn't slept. His mind had kept circling around the words in Claire's message, possible misdiagnosis, as if repeating them enough times might make them more real. The house was silent when he arrived. Even the usual hum of late-night activity, the dishwasher running, the faint clink of glassware being put away, was absent. He climbed the stairs quietly, passing Lily's room. The faint glow of her nightlight spilled into the hallway. He paused for a moment, listening to her steady breathing before moving on. In the kitchen, he found a small stack of papers on the counter. A note in Claire's handwriting rested on top. Dr. Sutter's initial report. We'll talk in the morning. By the time the sun rose, Ethan was in the study with a mug of coffee, reading every page. The report was cautious but promising. Dr. Sutter had outlined several test results that contradicted Lily's original diagnosis, pointing instead toward a neuromuscular coordination disorder, difficult, but potentially manageable with targeted therapy. The language was clinical, but between the lines Ethan could see it. A sliver of a future where Lily might walk. Claire appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back, still in her sweater from breakfast. "You read it," she said. "Twice," he replied. "Tell me everything she said that isn't in here." Claire stepped inside and closed the door. She thinks Lily's brain-to-muscle signaling is impaired but not destroyed. That means the muscles can still respond if trained the right way. She wants to start a new program immediately. Daily sessions, more intense than before, with regular progress checks. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "And the risks?" She said there will be setbacks, pain, frustration, maybe even temporary regression. But if it works, Claire let the sentence hang, as if she didn't dare complete it. He looked at the pages again, then back at her. "I'm canceling the next 2 business trips." Claire blinked. "Are you serious?" "I've spent years putting work first, telling myself it was for Lily's future. But if I keep missing moments like this, there won't be much of a future worth having." He pushed the report toward her. "We start as soon as possible." That afternoon, Ethan personally called Dr. Sutter's office to schedule the first intensive session. She had an opening the next day. When he told Lily, she tilted her head and asked, "Does this mean I'm going to walk?" Ethan crouched beside her, choosing his words carefully. "It means we're going to try something new. And if you work hard, you might surprise all of us." Lily grinned. "Then I'll work harder than anyone." The first session took place in a brightly lit therapy room at Dr. Sutter's clinic. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, but the walls were painted in soft blues and greens. Specialized equipment, parallel bars, padded mats, resistance bands, filled the space. A physical therapist named Rosa greeted them warmly. She explained each exercise before beginning, making sure Lily understood. The work was demanding. Small, deliberate movements to strengthen her core and retrain her balance. Ethan watched from the side, every muscle in his own body tensed as Lily's legs trembled under her. "Good," Rose encouraged. "Don't rush. Feel the ground under your feet." At one point, Lily's knees buckled, and Ethan instinctively stepped forward, but Claire caught his arm. "Let her try," she whispered, and Lily did. She straightened, her arms shaking, and held herself upright for a few seconds before easing back into the chair. Rosa clapped lightly. "That's progress. More than I expected for a first session." On the drive home, Lily chatted about the exercises, already asking when she could go back. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, marveling at the light in her eyes. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan and Claire sat in the living room with glasses of water, the day's event still fresh. "She's got fire," Claire said. "If we can keep her motivated, she'll surprise everyone." Ethan nodded slowly. "Including me." He hesitated, then added, "I know I've been hard on you, maybe even unfair, but I'm glad you pushed." Claire met his gaze for a moment before looking away. "It's not about being right. It's about giving her a chance." The fire in Ethan's chest burned a little brighter. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was bracing for the next disappointment. He felt like he was standing to start a fight, one he was ready to take on, no matter the cost. The first week of Lily's new therapy program was more demanding than anything she had experienced before. Ethan had rearranged his schedule to attend every session, sometimes sitting quietly in the corner, other times kneeling beside her to offer encouragement. Lily's determination seemed unshakable, but by the end of each day, her energy was spent. Claire kept a careful eye on her, adjusting evening routines so she could rest more. By the second week, Rosa had introduced a new exercise, one that required Lily to shift her weight from one foot to the other while holding onto a support bar. It was meant to strengthen her hip muscles and improve balance, but it was exhausting work. On Wednesday afternoon, the clinic was unusually busy, the air filled with a low murmur of therapists speaking to their patients. Lily was midway through the weight-shifting exercise when Ethan noticed her breathing change. Quicker, shallower. Rosa was encouraging her to take one more repetition when Lily's face tightened, her grip on the bar slipping. "Stop," Ethan said sharply, stepping forward. But before anyone could react, Lily's knees buckled completely. She collapsed into a heap on the mat, gasping for air. Claire was the first to reach her, sliding to her knees and cradling Lily's head. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, but her voice had an edge of urgency. Rosa knelt on the other side, checking Lily's pulse and motioning for a staff member to bring water. "She's overexerted. We need to slow things down." Ethan crouched beside them, his heart pounding. "Lily, talk to me. Does anything hurt?" "My legs and my chest," she whispered. That was all it took for Ethan to scoop her into his arms. "We're going to the hospital," he said, his voice brooking no argument. The drive to the emergency room felt endless. Claire sat in the back seat with Lily, keeping her calm while Ethan navigated through traffic. Once they arrived, the triage nurse moved them quickly into an exam room. Hours passed under the harsh hospital lights. Tests were run, vitals monitored. A young physician finally entered, holding a clipboard. "She's stable now. The episode was likely caused by muscle fatigue, combined with shallow breathing. There's no sign of permanent damage, but you need to understand that pushing too hard can backfire. Her body is still adapting." Ethan felt the words like a blow. "So what are you saying? Stop the program?" "Not necessarily," the doctor said, "but you need to find a sustainable pace. Right now, her ambition, or yours, maybe moving faster than her body can follow. When Lily was finally cleared to go home, she was quiet, her usual chatter replaced by a distant look. Back at the mansion, Ethan carried her upstairs himself, settling her into bed. She clutched her rabbit and whispered, "I don't want to stop trying." "You won't," he said softly. "We'll just go slower." After she fell asleep, he went downstairs to find Claire in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. "This was my fault," she said before he could speak. "I should have seen she was pushing past her limit." Ethan shook his head. "No, I was there. I saw her want to do more, and I didn't stop her either. We both underestimated how quickly she'd hit a wall." Claire's expression was tight. "The danger now is fear, hers and ours. If we let this scare her, she might lose the momentum she's built." Ethan poured himself a glass of water, thinking, "Then we make sure this doesn't become the moment she remembers as failure. Tomorrow, we do something with her that makes her feel strong again, even if it's not therapy." The next morning, instead of the clinic, Ethan took Lily to the small park near the house. The grass was still damp from an overnight drizzle, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves. He brought a kite, bright red, with a long yellow tail, and handed it to her. "Today's exercise," he said with a smile, "is making this fly higher than the trees." Lily laughed, the sound loosening something tight in his chest. They spent the next hour running short stretches, Lily holding the kite string while Ethan kept pace beside her. She stumbled once, but she caught herself, her grin never fading. By the time they returned home, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright again. It wasn't therapy, but it was something, a reminder that she could still move forward, even if the steps were smaller for now. That night, as Ethan stood in the doorway of her room watching her drift to sleep, he realized the setback hadn't destroyed their progress, but it had changed the fight. This wasn't going to be about speed anymore. It was going to be about endurance, for Lily and for all of them. The week after Lily's collapse at the clinic brought a slower pace. Rose adjusted the rehabilitation plan, replacing some of the more strenuous exercises with coordination drills and short bursts of movement. Lily accepted the changes without complaint. But Ethan noticed she was more thoughtful, as though she had begun to pay closer attention to the signals her body was sending her. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan sat in the study with Claire's old notebook in front of him. He flipped through the pages again, but this time he looked for patterns instead of progress milestones. Each entry had the same basic structure: the date, the exercises, and notes about Lily's mood or energy level. It was the timing that caught his attention. Days when Lily had been especially cheerful or engaged, after an art project, a visit to park, or a family dinner, were also the days she performed better physically. Her endurance, even her ability to remain upright, seemed directly linked to those moments. Days marked by boredom or frustration showed weaker results. Claire appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You're studying the thing like it's a financial report," she said, setting one mug on his desk. "I think there's more here than just exercise records," Ethan replied. "Have you noticed how her best days in therapy happen after something that excites her?" Claire smiled faintly. "Yes, that's part of why I started adjusting her schedule. When Lily's mind is engaged, her body follows. It's not just about muscle strength. It's about how her brain communicates with her body." He leaned back in his chair, mulling that over. If that's true, then her condition isn't just mechanical. It's neurological, maybe even psychological in part. "That's what I suspected for months," Claire said. "But I needed proof before I brought it to you." The next day, Ethan asked Dr. Sutter about his theory during a follow-up call. She didn't dismiss it. In fact, she sounded intrigued. "There's evidence," she said, "that certain neuromuscular conditions are strongly influenced by emotional or cognitive stimulation. If Lily's brain is more engaged, neural pathways can sometimes strengthen or bypass damaged areas. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible." That night, Ethan shared the conversation with Claire. They decided to experiment by deliberately scheduling therapy right after activities Lily loved. The first test came 2 days later. They took Lily to the Field Museum in Chicago, a place she had always adored. She spent hours exploring the exhibits, asking questions about the towering dinosaur skeletons and tracing her fingers along the glass cases. Her laughter echoed in the vast halls, the sound light and unguarded. That afternoon at the clinic, Rosa began with a simple standing drill. To Ethan's surprise, Lily not only stood, but managed to shift her weight from one leg to the other without prompting. Her legs trembled, but she held the position for nearly twice as long as the week before. "Whatever you did today," Rosa said afterward, "keep doing it." The results were too consistent to ignore. Over the next week, they repeated the pattern: a favorite bookshop visit, a painting session in the conservatory, even baking cookies together in the kitchen. Each time, Lily's therapy performance improved noticeably. But the biggest revelation came unexpectedly. One afternoon, while Ethan was organizing files in his office, he overheard Lily talking to her rabbit plushie in the hallway. "If I walk to Dad, he'll smile like that again," she whispered. It stopped him cold. He realized that much of Lily's determination came from her desire to surprise him, to give him something he thought was impossible. It wasn't just about movement. It was about connection. That night, Ethan stood in the quiet kitchen, looking at the notebook again. The data, the patterns, the emotional triggers, it all pointed toward a truth the original diagnosis had never accounted for. Lily's recovery might depend as much on joy and motivation as it did on physical therapy. It was no longer just about following a program. It was about creating the conditions for her to believe in her own strength and making sure nothing stood in the way of that belief. The winter sun was sharp that morning, streaming through the conservatory's glass panels in thin, golden shafts. Ethan stood at the doorway, sipping his coffee while Lily sat at the low table, carefully threading beads onto a string. Claire was beside her, speaking quietly, but there was an energy in the air that hadn't been there before, the kind that comes when something long-awaited is close. Dr. Sutter had suggested that after weeks of conditioning, it was time to push Lily into a small but significant challenge. Not another endurance drill, not just standing, but 3 steps, 3 measured steps toward a fixed point. It would be a milestone in her rehabilitation, one that could either solidify her progress or shake her confidence. The appointment was set for the end of the month, but Claire had proposed a trial run at home first. Ethan had been hesitant. What if she falls? He'd asked the night before. Then she falls. Claire had replied calmly, but she'll know she tried. And so will you. That afternoon, they prepared the living room. The coffee table was moved aside, the rug smoothed out, and a sturdy dining chair placed at one end of the room to serve as the starting point. Ethan stood across from it, hands in his pockets to hide how tightly they were clenched. Lily sat in the chair, her small feet flat against the rug. Claire knelt beside her, speaking in that steady, coaxing tone she always used when the stakes were high. "We're not looking for perfection, Lily. Just one step, then another, then one more. That's all." Lily nodded, biting her lip. "And you'll catch me if I fall?" "I will," Claire promised. Ethan watched as Lily's hands gripped the edge of the chair. She pushed herself upright, her knees shaking. For a moment, she wobbled, but she steadied herself with a deep breath. Her eyes flicked up, locking on his. "One step," Claire reminded gently. Lily's right foot lifted, moved forward, and touched the rug again. Her body swayed, but she didn't collapse. A second step followed, smaller this time. Ethan felt his own breath catch. She hesitated before the third step, her legs trembling harder now. Her gaze shifted briefly toward Claire, who gave the smallest of nods. With visible effort, Lily brought her left foot forward, and then her balance faltered. Ethan moved without thinking, catching her before she could hit the ground. She clung to him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You almost had it," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Her eyes shone with frustration. "Almost isn't walking. It's closer than you've ever been," he told her. "And that matters." Claire stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Lily's shoulder. "Tomorrow we try again, and the day after, until 3 steps feel easy." That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan lingered in the living room, staring at the space she had crossed. It was less than 6 feet, the kind of distance most people cover without thought, but to Lily, it had been a mountain. and she had climbed almost to the top. The following week, Dr. Sutter increased the therapy intensity again. Sessions now alternated between the clinic and the mansion, with Ethan and Claire both participating actively. They used the same 3-step goal but changed environments. In the garden, down the hallway, even in the conservatory where Lily liked to paint. Each attempt was a test, and each ended with her standing a little taller, her hesitation a little shorter. But the pressure was building. The official evaluation day at the clinic was approaching, and Ethan could feel the weight of it pressing on everyone. Even Lily seemed to sense that this was no longer just practice. On the morning of the evaluation, Ethan found her sitting on the edge of her bed, dressed and ready, her rabbit tucked under her arm. "You nervous?" he asked, sitting beside her. "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I just want to see your face if I do it." He smiled, though it wavered. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you already." At the clinic, the room was prepared with precision. The therapist positioned her at the starting point, Ethan waiting at the far end, hands loose at his sides. The atmosphere was quiet but charged, every eye fixed on Lily. Claire crouched beside her one last time. "Remember, 3 steps. You've done it before. Just breathe." Lily stood, steadier than she had in the living room weeks ago. She took the first step, smooth, confident. The second came more quickly, her weight shifting naturally. Then came the third. It was here that the line between hope and fear blurred. The third step landed with a soft thud on the clinic's padded flooring, and for a moment, Ethan thought time had stopped. Lily stood there, wobbling but upright, her cheeks flushed from the effort. A collective breath seemed to hang in the air. He took a step forward, ready to close the distance and scoop her into his arms. But Lily didn't move toward him. Instead, she turned her head, her eyes finding Claire, who was standing a few feet to her right. With a small, determined movement, Lily shifted her weight and took another step, not toward her father, but toward Claire. Ethan froze. Claire, startled, crouched instinctively, her hands open as if to receive a fragile gift. Lily took one more shaky step and collapsed against her, wrapping her arms around the nanny's neck. "I want to surprise Dad," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. Claire held her gently, stroking her hair. "You did, sweetheart, more than you know." Ethan approached slowly, unsure how to feel. Pride, yes, but tangled with something unexpected, a faint sting that she hadn't chosen him in that moment. Still, he couldn't deny the magnitude of what had just happened. His daughter had crossed the space between two people, unsupported, because she wanted to. The therapists were buzzing quietly, recording the distances, the stability, the time she had remained upright. Dr. Sutter stepped forward, her smile professional but warm. "That was more than 3 steps, Mr. Crawford. This is a significant breakthrough." On the ride home, Lily sat in the back seat, chattering about how she had kept a secret from him for weeks. "Claire said if I showed you too soon, it wouldn't be as special," she admitted. Ethan glanced at Claire in the passenger seat. She didn't look smug or apologetic, just quietly watchful. "And you agreed with that?" he asked her when Lily was distracted by the passing buildings outside. "I did," she replied simply, "because moments like today are about more than just progress. They're about memory. Now she'll remember this as the day she made you proud without you expecting it." He didn't answer right away. He wanted to be angry at being kept in the dark, but he knew she was right. The look on Lily's face when she had taken those steps was something he would carry with him forever. That evening, after dinner, Lily insisted on reenacting the moment in the living room. "Only this time," she said with a mischievous grin, "I'll walk to you." Ethan cleared a path while Claire adjusted the rug for safety. Lily stood at one end of the room, her knees trembling from the day's effort, but her eyes locked on him. Slowly, she moved, one step, then another, then a third. She stumbled slightly but caught herself before tumbling forward into his arms. He held her tightly, feeling the small, quick beat of her heart against his chest. "You've always made me proud, Lily. Always." Later, when she was asleep, Ethan found Claire in the kitchen rinsing a mug. "I'm still processing today," he said. "I figured you might be," she replied without turning. He leaned against the counter. "I can't say I love being left out of the loop." But I can't argue with the result. You were right. It was unforgettable. Claire finally looked at him. She did it for you, Ethan. Not for me. Not for the doctors. For you. And that's why I kept it quiet. Her words lingered long after he went to bed. For the first time, he realized that this journey wasn't just about Lily's legs or her diagnosis. It was about the relationships that fueled her determination. And if that meant sometimes stepping back to let her bond with someone else, maybe that was part of the fight too. The days after Lily's unexpected choice at the clinic unfolded differently from the ones before. There was a new current in the house, a mix of relief, anticipation, and quiet determination. Every morning, Ethan found himself more present at breakfast, watching Lily's movements with an almost obsessive attention, noting each time she shifted her weight or stood for a few extra seconds. Dr. Sutter's latest report arrived on a crisp, cream-colored envelope. This time, there was no guarded phrasing in the opening lines. Continued progress suggests a strong response to current therapy. Recommend intensifying program with a focus on endurance and fine motor coordination. Ethan read it twice before placing it on the dining table for Claire to see. This is as close as we've come to a green light, he told her that afternoon. Claire scanned the page, her lips curving in a rare smile. It's more than a green light. It's the start of a new road. They agreed to meet with Dr. Sutter in person to formalize a long-term plan. The appointment was set for following Monday. But in the meantime, life in the mansion began to shift. Ethan made a decision he had been postponing for years. He called an emergency meeting with his board of directors and announced that he would be stepping back from daily operations of the company. "I've built this business to a point where it can stand without me," he told them in the glass-wall conference room. "It's time I focus on something I can't delegate." The room was silent for a moment before Mark Dalton spoke. "You mean Lily?" "Yes," Ethan said simply. "I mean Lily." Back home that evening, he told her the news over dinner. She frowned slightly. "Does that mean you're not going to work anymore?" "Not as much," he explained. "It means I'll be here more often. I'll take you to more therapy sessions, maybe even pick you up from art class when you start again." Her eyes lit up. "Can we still go to the museum sometimes?" "As often as you want," he promised. Claire watched the exchange quietly, her expression softening as she cleared the plates. It struck Ethan then how much of Lily's progress was tied not only to medical intervention, but to stability of having both of them invested in her daily life. On Sunday morning, they decided to try something different. Instead of the usual therapy room setup, Claire suggested they go outside. The air was cool but bright, the kind of early spring day that hinted at warmth to come. They chose a long driveway as their track, its gentle slope leading toward the street. Lily stood at the top, her hands resting lightly on the handles of her wheelchair, which she had insisted on bringing just in case. Claire stayed close on one side, while Ethan positioned himself a few steps ahead. "Ready when you are," he said. Lily took a breath, then moved forward. The first step was cautious, the second more certain. By the fifth, her pace had slowed, but she didn't stop. The driveway stretched before her like an unspoken dare, and with each step, her breathing grew heavier but her determination more visible. When she reached him, Ethan didn't bend down immediately. He let her stand there for a moment, both of them silent, the sound of birds overhead filling the gap. Then he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did that. Not me, not Claire. You." She grinned, flushed and exhilarated. "I think I could go a little farther." That afternoon, while Lily rested upstairs, Ethan and Claire sat in the living room discussing the next phase. Claire laid out a schedule that alternated between clinic days and home practice, with built-in rest days to avoid another collapse like before. "I also think we should include more activities that aren't strictly therapy," she added. "Things she enjoys that still challenge her balance and coordination. Dancing, maybe, or light sports." Ethan considered it. "If it keeps her engaged, I'm on board." By the time Monday's meeting with Dr. Sutter arrived, they were ready with a proposal. The neurologist reviewed it with approval, adding her own refinements. "What you're doing is working because it's not just physical," she told him. "It's emotional. You're giving her a reason to move, not just a command." On the drive home, Ethan glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. She was humming softly, tapping her fingers against a rabbit's ear. For the first time since Rebecca's passing, he felt the weight of guilt begin to lift. He didn't know exactly how far Lily's recovery would go, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. The path ahead was still long, but it was clear, and he was going to walk it with her every step of the way. The first true warmth of spring had arrived, and with it came a sense of restless possibility in the Crawford house. The garden, dormant for months, was beginning to wake. Tulips pushing through the soil, the faint green haze of new leaves on the trees. Ethan had been watching the season change from his study window all week, but today it felt like more than just the weather was shifting. It was a Saturday morning, and the plan had been Claire's. No therapy room today. She had announced at breakfast, "We're going outside, not for a drill, not for practice, just for living." Lily was immediately intrigued. "Where are we going?" Claire only smiled. "You'll see." They spent the late morning in the garden, tending to the raised flower beds Rebecca had once loved. Ethan knelt beside Lily as she dug small holes for seedlings, her movements careful but increasingly steady. The sun was warm on their backs, and for a while, they forgot about therapy altogether. After lunch, Ethan disappeared upstairs, returning a few minutes later with Lily's sneakers in hand. "Put these on," he said. "We're taking a walk." Lily frowned. "How far?" "To the end of the driveway," he replied. "And maybe beyond if you feel like it." The driveway stretched nearly 100 feet from the house to the quiet residential street below. It wasn't far in the grand scheme of things, but to Lily, it had always been a distance measured in wheels, not steps. Claire wheeled out the empty chair just in case, but kept it well behind them. "We'll go at your pace," she told Lily. The first steps were slow, deliberate. Ethan walked on one side, Claire on the other, both close enough to catch her if needed, but far enough to let her feel her own balance. The sound of her sneakers scuffing against the pavement mixed with the soft rustle of wind through the budding trees. Halfway down, Lily paused. "It feels different out here," she said. "How so?" Ethan asked. "It's bigger, like the ground goes on forever." He smiled. "That's the world, Lily, and it's waiting for you." With a determined little nod, she took another step, then another. The rhythm began to settle into her body. Uneven, yes, but undeniably forward. Neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Hanley from across the street stepped out onto her porch, her gardening gloves still on. "Is that Lily?" she called, disbelief in her voice. "It is," Ethan answered, his chest swelling. By the time they reached the end of the driveway, 3 more neighbors had appeared, drawn by the sight of the girl they had only ever seen in a wheelchair, now standing on her own 2 feet. Lily looked around, startled by the small audience, but then something shifted in her. She let go of Ethan's arm entirely. "Can I go a little further?" she asked. Ethan glanced at Claire, who nodded. "As far as you want." Lily stepped off the driveway and onto the sidewalk, the spring sun warming her face. She walked a dozen paces down the block, turned, and came back again, each step lighter than the one before. When she reached Ethan, she slipped her small hand into his without hesitation. They began walking back toward the house together, hand in hand, the wheelchair still sitting in use at the edge of the driveway. The neighbors clapped quietly, as though afraid to break the spell. When they reached the front steps, Lily looked up at her father. "We don't have to tell the doctors yet," she said. "Let's just keep this for us a little while." Ethan crouched so they were eye to eye. "It's yours to share when you're ready." Inside, the air was cool and quiet, a sharp contrast of brightness outside. Ethan guided her into the living room, where she sank into the couch with a satisfied sigh. Claire brought glasses of lemonade, setting one in front of each of them. As they drank, Ethan found himself thinking about all the years he had spent measuring life in numbers, quarterly earnings, investment returns, miles traveled for business. None of it compared to the handful of steps he had just witnessed. Those steps were worth more than every deal he had ever closed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of gold and rose, Ethan suggested one more walk. Not for progress, not for proof, but simply because they could. Lily agreed instantly. and together they stepped back out into the soft light, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. They didn't go far. They didn't need to. Because in those quiet, steady moments, Ethan understood something with absolute clarity. All the wealth he had ever chased, all the empires he built, meant nothing compared to this. The feeling of his daughter's hand in his, moving forward together into a world that was suddenly wide open.